On a cold December morning in 1996, just 1 week before Christmas, a groundskeeper at Pleasant Valley Memorial Park in Annandale, Virginia, made a discovery that would haunt investigators for the next quarter century. What he found near the infant burial section would become one of the most poignant and mysterious cases in Fairfax County history. This is the story of the Christmas tree lady, a woman who went to extraordinary lengths to die anonymously, and the relentless pursuit to give her back her name. The discovery, December 18th, 1996, began like any other workday at Pleasant Valley Memorial Park Cemetery. The 13-acre cemetery, located at 8420 Little River Turnpike in Annandale, Virginia, had served families from Northern Virginia and the Washington metro area since 1963. The beautifully landscaped grounds featured mature trees sharing their seasonal foliage along paths that outlined well-maintained gardens. It was a place of peace and reflection where many local dignitaries and socially prominent Virginia names found their final rest. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, a groundskeeper named Jason and his colleague Donald were making their rounds on a golf cart, performing their usual maintenance duties. As they drove past the mausoleum adjacent to an area known as Babyland, the section of the cemetery designated for infant burials, something caught their attention. At first, they drove right past it, but something made them stop and look again. There, in the landscape bed next to the mausoleum, partially hidden behind bushes, was a scene that seemed almost staged in its careful arrangement. On a clear plastic sheet laid upon the ground rested the body of a woman. Next to her stood a small Christmas tree, just 8 inches tall, decorated with gold ball ornaments and red ribbon. The tiny tree stood as a silent sentinel, its festive decorations a stark contrast to the somber scene. The groundskeeper immediately contacted the authorities. Fairfax County homicide detectives Richard Perez and Mike Headley arrived at the cemetery approximately 40 minutes later, around 9:40 in the morning. When they approached the scene, they made an immediate and significant observation. The woman's body was still warm, indicating that whatever had happened had occurred very recently, perhaps only hours before. The woman lay on the clear plastic sheet she had carefully placed on the ground. She had a plastic bag secured over her head with masking tape. The cause of her death, clearly self-inflicted suffocation. She wore headphones connected to a portable cassette tape player. Later examination would reveal that she had been listening to a comedy recording, specifically The 2,000-Year-Old Man by Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, a classic comedy routine that had been popular since the 1960s. The choice of this particular recording would later strike many as particularly poignant. A woman choosing to spend her final moments listening to humor rather than dwelling on whatever pain had brought her to this point. Near the body, detectives found a green knapsack containing her belongings. Inside were 2 empty juice bottles and a new roll of masking tape. A brandy flask lay nearby. Later tests would confirm she had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.4. The autopsy would also reveal the presence of Valium in her system, a combination she had carefully orchestrated to ease her final moments. But it was what the detectives found in her pockets that made this case truly unusual. The woman carried no identification whatsoever. Nothing with her name, no credit cards, no driver's license, no receipts that might trace her movements. What she did have were 2 sealed envelopes, each containing a crisp $50 bill and the same typewritten note. The first envelope was addressed to the coroner, the second to the cemetery. Both contained identical messages. Deceased by own hand. Prefer no autopsy. Please order cremation with funds provided. Thank you, Jane Doe. She had signed the note, Jane Doe, deliberately choosing the placeholder name given to unidentified bodies. It was a clear, unmistakable message. This woman did not want to be identified. She had planned every detail of her death with meticulous care to ensure that her identity would remain a mystery. The investigation begins. Detective Richard Perez would later describe the profound frustration of the case to the Washington Post in 2000. What makes it so frustrating is that this isn't a case where we're dealing with skeletal remains. This is a lady that somebody should recognize, he said. The woman wasn't decomposed beyond recognition. She wasn't a skeleton discovered years after death. This was a recently deceased individual whose face could be seen, whose features could be documented, and yet nobody came forward to claim her. The physical description of the woman was carefully documented. She was Caucasian, with curly, copper, or reddish-colored hair that had an almost auburn quality to it. She stood approximately 5 feet tall and weighed about 157 pounds. Her estimated age was between 50 and 70 years old, though determining exact age would prove challenging. She wore bifocals with translucent frames, suggesting she needed vision correction for both near and far sight. Her fingernails were painted red, a small detail that suggested she took some care with her appearance. One particularly significant finding during the autopsy was an 8-inch scar on her abdomen. Medical examiners determined this was likely from a cesarean section, indicating she had given birth at least once in her life. This detail would become one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Somewhere, this woman had a child, possibly children. Somewhere, there might be family members who wondered what had become of her. Her clothing told a story of someone with means and taste. She wore a teal all-weather Eddie Bauer hooded jacket in size medium, a navy blue Classiques Entier sweater in size large, a red Classiques Entier sweater in size extra large, a red Classiques Entier sleeveless silk shirt in petite large, and navy blue Classiques Entier knit wool pants in size large. Her undergarments were simple, a white support bra and white Fruit of the Loom underpants in size 6. On her feet were black loafers in size 7 medium and knee-high stockings. The Classiques Entier brand was significant. This was an upscale clothing line exclusive to Nordstrom department stores. At the time, Classiques Entier wool slacks sold for about $188, while a silk sleeveless top went for $98. These were not inexpensive clothes. The nearest Nordstrom locations to Pleasant Valley Memorial Park included stores in Arlington, just 237 miles away, McLean, 764 miles away, and Bethesda, Maryland, 976 miles away. This suggested the woman likely lived in the Northern Virginia or Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and had the financial means to shop at high-end retailers. Detective Perez made an observation that would echo through the investigation. "If she's a drifter, she's the best-kept drifter I've ever seen," he noted, referring to her upscale clothes and overall appearance. Everything about her suggested a woman of means and careful habits, not someone living on the margins of society. Her jewelry was equally telling. She wore 2 clip-on earrings, a small gold women's Guess watch with a mesh band, and a 14-karat gold ring with 4 jade stones. Perhaps most significantly, she wore a metal bead chain with a medic alert tag that read, "No code, DNR, no penicillin." This medical alert bracelet indicated she had made advanced decisions about her medical care, specifying do not resuscitate orders and an allergy to penicillin. It suggested someone who had thought carefully about medical matters, someone who had been under a doctor's care at some point. The location she chose for her death was not random. Pleasant Valley Memorial Park was not a cemetery that a drifter or someone unfamiliar with the area would likely know about. The deliberate choice of the infant burial section, the area known as Babyland, seemed deeply symbolic. She hadn't positioned herself near any particular grave, but the fact that she chose this specific section of the cemetery suggested a meaning known only to her. Some would later speculate that it represented lost innocence, lost children, or perhaps a connection to her own past that only she understood. The Christmas tree itself became the most haunting symbol of the case. Standing just 8 inches tall, carefully decorated with gold ornaments and red ribbon, it seemed to represent both celebration and sorrow. The fact that she chose to die 1 week before Christmas, surrounded by this small symbol of the holiday, added another layer of mystery and sadness to the scene. What did Christmas mean to her? Was this a holiday she once celebrated with family? Was the small tree a symbol of happier times now lost? Initial investigative efforts. The Fairfax County Police Department launched an intensive investigation. A composite drawing of the woman was created and distributed to the news media in 1996. The drawing showed a woman with curly hair, wearing glasses, her features carefully rendered by a police artist. The image was circulated widely in the hope that someone, somewhere, would recognize her. Her fingerprints and palm prints were taken and entered into multiple databases. They were coded into the National Crime Information Center's database, the FBI's system for tracking criminal information. They were also checked against the automated fingerprint identification system, but there were no matches. The woman had never been arrested, never been fingerprinted for any official purpose that would have put her prints into the system. A dental examination was conducted, and her dental records were meticulously documented. Investigators hoped that dental records might be the key to identification, as they often are in unidentified person cases. The dental chart was made available to dentists across the region and eventually entered into national databases. Still, no matches were found. DNA samples were collected and preserved, though in 1996, DNA technology was far more limited than it would become in subsequent years. The samples were entered into the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, the FBI's database that primarily contains DNA profiles of people who have been arrested. As with the fingerprints, there were no matches. Radiologists carefully reviewed X-rays of the woman's body, looking for any distinctive marks, old breaks, or abnormalities that might help identify her. They were searching for anything unique that might appear in medical records somewhere. But again, the search yielded no results. Detectives from the Fairfax County Police Department spent countless hours comparing the woman's physical description to missing persons reports. They reviewed numerous cases from the National Capital Region and beyond, looking for anyone who matched her description. Every missing woman in the appropriate age range was considered, investigated, and ultimately ruled out. Over the years, more than 600 missing women would be compared to the Annandale Jane Doe and eliminated as possible matches through dental and fingerprint comparisons. In 2000, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an enhanced photo of the woman. This colorized image was published in the Washington Post and distributed across various websites and databases dedicated to missing and unidentified persons. The hope was that this more lifelike image might trigger recognition from someone who had known her. People were urged to look closely at the face staring back from the photograph, to search their memories for anyone who resembled this woman. Investigators pursued every possible lead they could develop. They attempted to determine the prescription of her eyeglasses and identify the brand of the frames, hoping to trace them back to an optometrist who might have records of her. They researched the brand of juice found in the bottles in her backpack, which was somewhat unusual, trying to determine where it was distributed and sold. They posted pictures of her jewelry on the internet, hoping someone might recognize the distinctive jade ring or the guess watch. The case was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, known as NAMUS, as case number UP6279. NAMUS, launched in 2007 as a nationwide information clearinghouse, brought together missing persons cases and unidentified remains cases in a searchable database. The Christmas Tree Lady's case became one of thousands of unidentified persons in the system, a number in a database representing a life whose story had been lost. Detective Melissa Wallace, who worked the case for the Cold Case Squad, would later describe the various creative approaches investigators tried over the years. They explored every angle they could think of, following leads that ranged from promising to desperate. But year after year, the woman remained unidentified. The case took on a life of its own in popular culture. True crime forums discussed the mystery endlessly. Web sleuths pored over every detail, creating theories about who she might have been and why she chose to die anonymously. The small Christmas tree became an iconic image, appearing in countless blog posts and articles about the case. She became known universally as the Christmas Tree Lady, a name that was both evocative and sad, reducing a full human life to a single symbol. The case goes cold. As the years passed, the Christmas Tree Lady case moved from active investigation to cold case status. The Fairfax County Police Department's Cold Case Squad, founded in 1995 and falling under the Major Crimes Bureau, took over responsibility for the case. The squad, made up of dedicated detectives committed to solving unsolved homicides and mysterious deaths, kept the case file active, but there were simply no new leads to pursue. The evidence from the case was carefully preserved and stored. Fairfax County Police had a policy of maintaining evidence from cases dating as far back as 1963, and detectives periodically pulled out old files to review them with fresh eyes. "No case is really too old," a spokesperson would later note. "We don't throw this stuff away. Detectives really do pull it out time and again." But despite this dedication, the Christmas tree lady case seemed unsolvable. The woman had been too careful, too thorough in eliminating any trace of her identity. She had left no receipts, no paperwork, nothing that could connect her to a specific location or time. Every choice she made in her final hours seemed calculated to prevent anyone from learning who she was. The frustration was particularly acute because this wasn't a murder investigation where a killer had deliberately hidden a victim's identity. This was a woman who had chosen anonymity for herself. Investigators wanted to respect her apparent wishes for privacy, yet they also felt a duty to give her family, wherever they might be, answers about what had happened to her. It was a delicate balance between honoring what seemed to be her final request and fulfilling their obligation to the unknown people who might be wondering where she had gone. Somewhere, investigators believed, there had to be people who knew this woman. The C-section scar indicated she had given birth. She had to have had a life before that December morning in 1996. Where were her children, her siblings, her friends? How could someone simply vanish from the lives of everyone who had ever known them? The case also raised broader questions about society and human connection. In an increasingly mobile and disconnected world, how many people could disappear without anyone noticing? The Christmas tree lady had evidently moved to Virginia sometime in the mid-1980s, more than a decade before her death. Had she maintained no connections with anyone during those years? Or had she carefully severed all ties in preparation for her eventual suicide? The story resonated with people because it touched on deep human fears about isolation and being forgotten. The image of a woman dying alone in a cemetery with only a small Christmas tree for company struck a chord with anyone who had ever felt disconnected or alone. Online forums and true crime communities kept the case alive in public consciousness, with people periodically returning to discuss it, sharing theories, and expressing hope that someday someone would recognize her. Advances in DNA technology. While the case remained cold for more than 2 decades, the world of forensic science was undergoing a revolution. The same DNA technology that had existed in a primitive form in 1996 was evolving rapidly, opening new possibilities for solving old cases. The breakthrough that would eventually identify the Christmas tree lady came from a field called forensic genetic genealogy. This technique combines advanced DNA sequencing with genealogical research to identify unknown individuals through their family members. The process works even when the individual themselves has never submitted DNA to any database. Traditional DNA testing in criminal justice relied on a system called STR analysis, which examines about 20 specific markers in a person's DNA. This system works well when you need to match DNA found at a crime scene to a specific suspect, or when you need to confirm that 2 samples came from the same person. But it has a significant limitation. It only works if the person's DNA profile already exists in a database like CODIS. Forensic genetic genealogy takes a completely different approach. Instead of looking at just 20 markers, it sequences hundreds of thousands of genetic markers across a person's entire genome. This creates a much more detailed genetic picture, one that can be used to identify not just the individual, but their relatives, even distant cousins they may never have met. The technique gained widespread attention in 2018 when it was used to identify the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo, who had committed a series of murders and sexual assaults in California during the 1970s and 1980s. In that case, investigators uploaded DNA from crime scenes to a public genealogy database and found distant relatives of the killer. Genealogists then worked backward through family trees to identify D'Angelo as the suspect. The success of the Golden State Killer case demonstrated that forensic genetic genealogy could solve cases that had seemed unsolvable through traditional methods. Soon, law enforcement agencies across the country began turning to this new technology for cold cases involving both unidentified victims and unknown perpetrators. A company called Othram Inc., based outside Houston, Texas, emerged as a leader in this field. Founded in 2018 by David Middleman and his wife Kristen Middleman, Othram specialized specifically in using advanced genomic technologies for forensic purposes. The company's mission was human identification for victims or perpetrators from crime scenes, and nothing else. David Middleman explained the advantage of Othram's approach. Standard forensic testing uses 20 markers, and they can compare those 20 markers to an unknown perpetrator database. Unfortunately, victims like the Christmas tree lady are not usually in an unknown perpetrator database, so you don't get your answers. What we've done is we've built technology where we build a DNA profile that looks at hundreds and hundreds of thousands of markers and not just 20. Othram's process involved taking forensic DNA evidence, often degraded or contaminated samples that traditional methods couldn't work with, and using forensic-grade genome sequencing to create a comprehensive genetic profile. This profile would then be uploaded to public genealogy databases, where people had voluntarily submitted their DNA for ancestry research. The databases included GED Match and Family Tree DNA, which, unlike commercial services like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, allowed law enforcement access. The Middlemans explained that about 4 million genetic profiles existed in these publicly available databases. While that might seem like a small number compared to the hundreds of millions of people in the United States, it was usually enough. It's not someone you have Thanksgiving with, David Middleman noted, about the relatives typically identified. Your genetic family is not your social family. With every one of these folks, at the third or fourth cousin level, you can build a scaffold, finding links that lead to the eventual target. Kristen Middleman, Othram's chief development officer, emphasized that their work went beyond just the technology. "We are here to support law enforcement," she said. "We don't stop until every single one of these has justice." However, there was a significant challenge: cost. Creating a forensic genetic genealogy profile required expensive equipment, specialized expertise, and considerable time. Depending on the quality of the remains and the amount of genealogical research required, a single case could cost between $5,000 and $10,000. Most law enforcement agencies didn't have budget allocation for this type of specialized testing. Othram's solution was innovative: crowdfunding. Through a platform called DNA Solves, which Othram created specifically for this purpose, the company allowed members of the public to donate money towards solving specific cases. True crime enthusiasts, genealogy buffs, and people simply moved by particular stories could contribute funds to help identify unknown victims. The approach had a beautiful symmetry to it. In many cases, the families of unidentified victims had no idea their loved one was missing or unidentified. They couldn't advocate for him or fund testing. But complete strangers, moved by humanity and a desire for justice, could step in to help. It democratized the process of solving cold cases, allowing ordinary citizens to play a crucial role in bringing answers to families. The breakthrough. In early 2022, Major Ed O'Carroll, who headed the Fairfax County Police Department's Major Crimes Cyber and Forensics Bureau, made the decision to reach out to Othram about the Christmas tree lady case. O'Carroll had been with the department through multiple generations of detectives who had worked the case, and he felt strongly that the woman deserved to have her identity restored, regardless of her apparent wishes for anonymity. "Somebody deserves answers," O'Carroll said in April 2022 as the partnership with Othram was announced, "and we don't know who that somebody is. but we're determined to find out. By all indications, it's not a criminal case, but it's an open case. We're hoping the latest in technology that did not exist 25 years ago can help us find those answers for those she left behind. O'Carroll acknowledged the unique nature of the case. Most of the cold cases his bureau worked involved homicides where there was a clear victim and a perpetrator they were trying to find. This case involved what appeared to be a suicide with no criminal to pursue. Yet he felt it was deserving of their attention because somewhere there might be family members with unanswered questions. The case was posted on the DNA Solves website in March 2022 with a funding goal of $5,000. The response from the public was immediate and overwhelming. Anonymous donors from across the country contributed to the cause, many of them moved by the story of the woman who had died alone with her small Christmas tree. The case was fully funded within weeks. In January 2022, detectives from the Fairfax County Police Department had sent physical evidence from the case to Othram's laboratory in Texas. The scientists there faced a challenging task. The DNA samples were 26 years old, and while they had been properly preserved, DNA can degrade over time. The team had to use all of their expertise in DNA extraction, enrichment, and repair to build a usable profile. But Othram specialized in handling difficult samples. Their technology included automatic human enrichment and specialized workflows designed specifically for degraded forensic evidence. They had successfully identified remains that were far older and in far worse condition than the Christmas tree lady's samples. The scientists worked methodically through the process. First, they extracted DNA from the preserved samples. Then they used advanced sequencing techniques to read the genetic information, building a comprehensive profile that included hundreds of thousands of genetic markers. This profile was then uploaded to genealogy databases to search for matches. The search identified potential relatives, people who shared genetic markers with the unknown woman. These weren't close relatives like parents or siblings, but more distant connections, the kind of genetic links that might connect third or fourth cousins. But these distant connections were enough to build what genealogists call a scaffold, a framework of family relationships that could be traced and followed. Othram's genealogists, working with the genetic matches they had found, began the painstaking work of building family trees. They researched birth records, marriage records, census data, and obituaries, piecing together generations of families to find where these genetic lines might intersect. It was detective work of a different kind, requiring patience, attention to detail, and creative thinking. In May 2022, the work paid off. Othram returned investigative leads to the Fairfax County detectives, pointing them toward a specific family in Iowa. The company believed they had identified a potential close relative of the Christmas tree lady. Finding the family. The lead pointed investigators to David Meyer, an 88-year-old man living in Virginia Beach. The genetic evidence suggested he could be the Christmas tree lady's brother. Detectives contacted Meyer and showed him the composite drawing that had been created in 1996. Meyer studied the image carefully, but he couldn't say with certainty whether it was his sister. The problem was simple and heartbreaking. It had been 50 years since he had last seen her. Half a century had passed since they had been in the same room, since he had heard her voice or seen her face. How could he be sure that the sketch of an elderly woman bore any resemblance to the young sister he remembered from decades ago? But Meyer's response was enough to confirm that investigators were on the right track. He told them about his sister, Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers, the eldest of 5 siblings, who had been estranged from the family since the 1980s. He confirmed that the family had lost contact with Joyce and hadn't known what had become of her. Detectives then contacted the only other remaining Meyer sibling, Annette Meyer Clough, who lived near Phoenix, Arizona. When they showed Clough the composite sketch, her response was immediate and certain. 1,000%, she told them. That was her older sister, Joyce. Clough agreed to provide a DNA sample for comparison. The sample was sent to Othram analyst Carla Davis, who performed the comparison between Clough's DNA and the genetic profile that had been built from the Christmas tree lady's remains. The results were conclusive. The woman who had died in Pleasant Valley Memorial Park on December 18, 1996, was Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers. On May 11, 2022, the identification was officially confirmed. After more than 25 years, the Christmas tree lady had a name. On July 7, 2022, the Fairfax County Police Department held a press conference to announce the breakthrough. Major O'Carroll addressed the media, explaining how advances in DNA technology and the generous contributions of anonymous donors had made the identification possible. After decades of wondering what happened to their loved one, Joyce's family is finally at peace, thanks to the dedicated work of several generations of FCPD detectives, anonymous donors, and Othram, O'Carroll said. Our detectives never stopped working for Joyce and her family. Advances in technology will continue to help close cases and provide answers to victims' families. The announcement made headlines across the country. The Christmas tree lady mystery that had captivated true crime enthusiasts for years had finally been solved. But the identification raised as many questions as it answered. Who was Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers? What had led her to that cemetery on that December morning? And why had she chosen to die anonymously? The life of Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers. As investigators and journalists began to piece together Joyce's story, a picture emerged of an intelligent, creative woman whose life had been marked by deep estrangement from her family and profound personal pain. Joyce Marilyn Meyer was born on July 20th, 1927 to Arthur Meyer and Margaret Meyer. She was the oldest of 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys, raised on a farm outside of Davenport, Iowa. Her childhood took place during the Great Depression and the years leading up to World War II, a time of both hardship and strong community bonds in rural America. Those who knew young Joyce described her as very creative and very smart. She was artistic, with talents that suggested a bright future. After completing her primary education, Joyce attended Iowa State University, a significant achievement for a farm girl from her era. Not many women from rural Iowa had the opportunity for higher education in the 1940s, and Joyce's attendance at university suggested both her intellectual capabilities and her family's support for her ambitions. After college, Joyce made a bold move that must have seemed almost impossibly adventurous for someone from her background. She relocated to Los Angeles, California, where she moved in with an aunt and secured a job at 17 magazine. This was a prestigious position for a young woman in the post-war era. 17, which had been founded in 1944, was at the height of its cultural influence, helping to define teenage culture and fashion in America. Her sister Annette would later remember this period fondly. She was very creative and very smart. She was artistic. The work at 17 seemed perfectly suited to Joyce's talents and interests. For a while, at least, it seemed like she had found her place in the world, far from the Iowa farm where she had grown up. But Joyce's time at 17 came to an end in the 1950s. She left the magazine and took a very different kind of job, teaching second grade at a Catholic elementary school in Los Angeles. According to family accounts, this was an extremely difficult period for Joyce. It was rough, Annette Clough recalled. She had 60 second graders and had no education background. She was very alert, staying up till early morning to plan lessons. Managing 60 young children without formal teacher training would be challenging for anyone, and it seems to have been overwhelming for Joyce. Around this same time, something else happened that would change the course of her life. She began seeing a psychiatrist. The 1950s and 1960s were a period of significant change in American psychiatry and psychology. Freudian psychoanalysis was at the height of its influence, and certain therapeutic approaches that emphasized blaming parents, particularly mothers, for psychological problems were unfortunately common. Some therapists of this era encouraged their patients to sever ties with families they deemed harmful or toxic. According to family accounts, Joyce's therapist followed this approach, encouraging her to blame her family, especially her mother, for her problems. Whatever Joyce's actual childhood experiences had been, the therapeutic relationship seems to have fostered a growing alienation from her family. In the 1960s, this tension came to a head. Joyce's mother, Margaret Meyer, traveled from Iowa to California for what Annette described as a 24-hour confrontation session with Joyce. During this meeting, Joyce accused her mother of being a terrible parent. "It was just awful," Clough remembered. "It broke my mother's heart." Annette insisted that she didn't believe their parents had been abusive, or that any of the siblings had suffered during their upbringing. From her perspective, Joyce's accusations were unfounded, perhaps the result of whatever she was working through in therapy. But for Joyce, the rift with her mother seemed to represent something very real and very painful. The confrontation with her mother marked the beginning of Joyce's gradual estrangement from her entire family. She continued to write letters to her siblings, but she revealed less and less about her life as time went on. The letters became increasingly cryptic and distant. At some point, Joyce moved from Los Angeles to Seattle, Washington. There, she married a man named James E. Sommers, taking his last name. Remarkably, she never informed her family about the marriage. Police would later find divorce papers showing that Joyce and James Sommers divorced in 1977 after apparently having no children together. The fact that she had married and divorced without ever telling her family speaks to the depth of the estrangement. After the divorce, Joyce moved to Tucson, Arizona, where she lived in a trailer at a trailer park. Family members who visited her there found her unhappy with the situation. According to Clough, during one of these visits, Joyce asked the family to build her a home. The family couldn't fulfill this request, and Joyce was apparently upset by their inability to help. This was also when Joyce wrote a book. During the early 1990s, Joyce's brother, Larry Meyer, traveled to Tucson hoping to locate her, only to find her trailer abandoned. Inside, in a refrigerator, he discovered 4 copies of a self-published book titled The Target Child, written by Joyce Meyer Sommers. The book was Joyce's account of what she described as a traumatic upbringing. Family members who later learned about the book maintained that Joyce's portrayal of her childhood wasn't accurate, that their parents hadn't been abusive. But the existence of the book and Joyce's choice to write it and apparently distribute copies indicates that she carried deep pain about her past, whether that pain was rooted in actual events or in her perception and interpretation of those events. In the 1980s, Joyce's family began to realize that they had completely lost contact with her. They tried various means to locate her. Annette and her siblings suspected that Joyce might have joined a cult, a fear that perhaps reflected the era's concerns about religious movements and cults, or perhaps reflected something they had heard or sensed about Joyce's state of mind. The family hired a private investigator to try to find Joyce. The investigator found some evidence that she might have moved to the East Coast, but the leads went nowhere. They couldn't find her anywhere, Clough recalled. The case was cold. Meanwhile, Joyce had indeed moved to the East Coast. Examination of various databases and public records suggested that she lived in Northern Virginia in 1996, possibly in Alexandria. There was also evidence of an address for her in downtown Washington, D.C., specifically a townhouse on Massachusetts Avenue that has since been incorporated into another building. At some point during this period, probably in the mid-1980s, Joyce moved to the Northern Virginia area. She appears to have lived there quietly for about a decade, from the mid-1980s until her death in 1996. During those years, she had no family in the immediate area and wasn't reported missing because her family had already lost track of her years earlier. What Joyce's life was like during those final years remains largely unknown. She apparently had enough money to shop at high-end stores like Nordstrom and to maintain a neat, well-groomed appearance. She had access to prescription medications like Valium and wore a medical alert bracelet, indicating she had made advanced care directives. These details suggest someone who was still managing the practical aspects of life, who was seeing doctors and making plans, even as something inside her was moving inexorably toward that December morning in the cemetery. The symbolic significance. The choice of location for Joyce's death seems particularly significant in light of what we know about her life. She chose the infant burial section of the cemetery, the area known as Babyland, When asked about this choice, her sister Annette speculated that Joyce might have selected this location as a symbolic gesture related to her belief that parental actions can permanently harm children. This interpretation gains additional weight when we consider The Target Child, Joyce's book about her allegedly traumatic upbringing. Whether or not her family agrees with Joyce's characterization of her childhood, it's clear that Joyce believed deeply that she had been harmed by her parents. Her entire adult life was shaped by this belief and the pain it caused her. By choosing to die among the graves of children, Joyce may have been making a statement about lost innocence, about children who never got to grow up, or about the ways that childhood wounds can follow someone throughout their entire life. Perhaps she saw herself as one of these lost children, someone whose life had been determined by events from long ago that she could never escape. The small Christmas tree is equally symbolic, though its meaning is less clear. Christmas is traditionally a family holiday, a time of togetherness and celebration. For someone who had been estranged from her family for decades, the approach of Christmas might have been particularly painful, an annual reminder of what she had lost or never had. The fact that she chose to die exactly 1 week before Christmas, and that she brought with her a small, carefully decorated tree, suggests that the holiday held deep meaning for her. Was the tree a symbol of happier Christmases from her childhood, before everything went wrong? Was it an acknowledgement of the season despite her isolation? Or was it a final, poignant gesture of defiance, claiming some small piece of holiday joy even in death? We know that Joyce spent her final moments listening to comedy. The 2,000-Year-Old Man, by Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, was a classic comedy routine that had been beloved since the 1960s. The choice to listen to humor rather than music or silence suggests someone who still found value in laughter, who still wanted to experience some lightness, even as she prepared to die. The meticulous planning of her death also tells us something about Joyce. She brought exactly the right amount of money for cremation, carefully divided into 2 envelopes. She wrote clear instructions for what should be done with her body. She brought a plastic sheet to lie on, masking tape to secure the bag over her head, alcohol and Valium to ease the process, headphones and a cassette player for comfort, and a Christmas tree for symbolism or companionship or memory. This was not an impulsive act. This was something she had thought about carefully, planned for, and executed with precision. She had also taken extraordinary care to prevent identification, leaving no receipts, no identification, nothing that could connect her to any specific place or person. Detective Perez's 2000 observation remains haunting. This lady appears to have taken a thoughtful effort to leave us no clue as to who she is, and she's got it all plotted out. The family's response. When Annette Meyer learned in 2022 that her sister had been found, her emotions were complex. Speaking to the Washington Post, she expressed both shock and a kind of sad recognition. "I was stunned. Just stunned," she said. The family had been looking for her. They were still looking for her a year after her death. The revelation meant that while the family had been searching for Joyce, hiring private investigators and following dead-end leads, she had already been gone for years. All those efforts, all that wondering, had been happening while Joyce lay in a morgue, unidentified and unclaimed. But Clough also expressed some relief. "I'm relieved to know that nothing terrible happened to her," she said. It sounds like something she had been planning for a long time. This statement is particularly poignant. On one level, of course, something terrible did happen to Joyce. She took her own life. But from Clough's perspective, there were worse possibilities. She could have been murdered. She could have been kidnapped. She could have suffered some fate that involved being victimized by another person. Instead, as painful as it was, Joyce had made her own choice about how and when to end her life. Clough's other observation was equally telling. The way she planned it out, that was her. She was very careful. We couldn't find her. Even decades after their estrangement, Annette recognized in the meticulous planning of Joyce's death the personality traits of the sister she had known. Joyce had always been careful, always thoughtful, always thorough in whatever she did. In this final act, she had been true to her nature. The family's inability to find Joyce during her lifetime was both a result of Joyce's deliberate choices and a reflection of how thoroughly someone can disappear in modern America. Joyce had moved multiple times, married and divorced without telling her family, used different names, and ultimately settled in an area where she had no connections to her past. She had effectively erased herself from her own history. Broader implications. The case of Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers raises profound questions about family estrangement, mental health, and the right to die anonymously. Family estrangement is more common than many people realize. Studies suggest that approximately 1 in 4 adults are estranged from at least one family member at some point in their lives. The reasons for estrangement vary widely, from abuse and dysfunction to misunderstandings, personality conflicts, and the aftermath of divorce or family disputes. In recent decades, there has been growing discussion about whether estrangement represents a healthy boundary setting by adults who need to protect themselves from toxic family relationships, or whether it sometimes reflects a cultural tendency to solve problems by cutting ties rather than working through difficulties. Joyce's case seems to involve elements of both perspectives. If we believe her family's account, the estrangement was based on Joyce's perception of childhood trauma that her siblings don't believe happened. The psychiatric treatment she received apparently reinforced her belief that her family was the source of her problems, and that distance from them was necessary for her well-being. But whatever the objective truth about Joyce's childhood, it's clear that she experienced real pain that shaped her entire adult life. The fact that she wrote a book about her traumatic upbringing and self-published it suggests she wanted her story told, wanted someone to understand what she believed she had endured. The tragedy is that the estrangement, which perhaps began as an attempt to protect herself or heal from perceived trauma, ultimately led to complete isolation. By the end of her life, Joyce was so disconnected from everyone who had ever known her that she could die without anyone knowing she was gone. There was no one to file a missing persons report because there was no one who knew she was missing. This raises questions about how society handles mental health and family conflict. Would different therapeutic approaches have led to a different outcome? If Joyce's therapist in the 1950s hadn't encouraged her to blame and distance herself from her family, might she have maintained those connections? Or were the family dynamics genuinely harmful, making the estrangement necessary for Joyce's well-being, at least initially? We cannot know the answers to these questions. What we do know is that the path Joyce took led to profound loneliness, and ultimately to her death in a cemetery, alone, except for a small Christmas tree. The case also highlights the challenge of respecting someone's apparent wish for anonymity while recognizing the needs of families for closure. Joyce signed her suicide note, Jane Doe. She deliberately left no identification. She took every possible step to ensure she would not be identified. In doing so, she was expressing a clear wish. She did not want her family to know what had become of her. Yet, investigators, and ultimately the public through their donations to DNA Solves, chose to pursue her identification anyway. Was this the right decision? Major O'Carroll and the Fairfax County detectives believed it was. They argued that while Joyce wanted anonymity, somewhere there might be family members who deserved answers. The fact that they were proven right, that Joyce's siblings had indeed been searching for her and hiring private investigators to find her, suggests that the decision to identify her was justified. But it also raises uncomfortable questions. Do we have the right to override someone's final wishes, even for what we believe are good reasons? If Joyce truly wanted to disappear, to die without her family knowing, should we have honored that wish? Or does the need for closure and the prevention of suffering for surviving family members outweigh the deceased's right to anonymity? These questions don't have easy answers, and different people will reach different conclusions based on their values and experiences. The role of technology and citizen involvement. The resolution of Joyce's case would not have been possible without two crucial developments: advances in DNA technology and citizen involvement through crowdfunding. The DNA technology that identified Joyce didn't exist in any practical form when she died in 1996. While DNA testing had been used in criminal cases since the late 1980s, the type of comprehensive genome sequencing that Othram performs only became possible in the 21st century. The company itself wasn't founded until 2018, more than 2 decades after Joyce's death. This technological advancement means that thousands of cold cases, both unidentified persons and unsolved crimes, can now potentially be solved. Every unidentified body, every Jane Doe and John Doe, who has been lying in a morgue or buried in a potter's field for decades, might now be identifiable through this technology. But technology alone isn't enough. Someone has to pay for the testing, and most law enforcement agencies lack the budget for expensive DNA analysis on cases that aren't active homicide investigations. This is where citizen involvement becomes crucial. The crowdfunding model that Othram pioneered through DNA Solves has democratized the process of solving cold cases. People who have no connection to a particular case, who simply care about justice and closure, can contribute whatever amount they can afford. Small donations from hundreds or thousands of people can add up to the funding needed to solve a case. This represents a fascinating shift in how society approaches unsolved cases. Traditionally, whether a case got resources for advanced testing depended on law enforcement budgets, political priorities, and the judgment of investigators about which cases were most solvable or most important. Now, public interest and compassion can drive which cases get attention. The anonymous donors who funded Joyce's identification will never know her name or the details of her life. They simply saw the case on DNA Solves, read about the woman with the Christmas tree, and decided to contribute. Their collective generosity gave Joyce back her identity and gave her family answers they had been seeking for decades. This model has solved hundreds of cases since Othram began operations. The company has helped identify victims of the Golden State Killer, solved decades-old murder cases, and given names back to unidentified remains across the country. Each identification represents not just a solution to a mystery, but relief for families who have been living with uncertainty. The mystery that remains. While we now know who the Christmas tree lady was, many mysteries about Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers remain unsolved. We don't know exactly where she lived during her final years in Northern Virginia. While there's evidence she may have lived in Alexandria or Washington, D.C., we don't know her exact address, whether she lived alone, whether she had friends or acquaintances, or how she spent her days. We don't know if she was employed during those years or if she was living on savings or some other source of income. We don't know if she had contact with anyone in the area or if she was as isolated as her death suggests. We don't know what specifically triggered her decision to end her life on that particular day. Was it something related to the approaching Christmas holiday? Was it an anniversary of some significant event? Was it simply that she had decided it was time, and December 18th, 1996 was the day she chose? We don't know for certain why she chose Pleasant Valley Memorial Park. Was it simply a cemetery she had seen and liked? Did it have some specific significance to her? Or was the choice of the infant burial section the important part, with the specific cemetery being secondary? We don't fully understand the significance of the Christmas tree. Was it a nod to the season? A symbol of something from her past? A representation of innocence or childhood? Joyce took that meaning to her grave. We don't know if Joyce tried to reach out to anyone before her death, if she left any letters or messages for anyone besides the brief note to the coroner and cemetery. We don't know if she had second thoughts, if she was afraid, or if she was at peace with her decision. Most fundamentally, we don't know if Joyce's perceptions of her childhood and her family were accurate. We have only her siblings' insistence that the family wasn't abusive, and Joyce's book, claiming she suffered trauma. The truth probably lies somewhere in that contested space, between different memories and interpretations of the same events. These mysteries will likely never be fully solved. The only person who could answer these questions is gone, and she chose to leave very few answers behind. Lessons and reflections. The story of Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers offers several important lessons and points for reflection. First, it highlights the profound consequences of family estrangement, whatever the reasons. For the estrangement, whether justified or not, the end result was complete isolation and a death so lonely that the woman chose to identify herself only as Jane Doe. The breakdown of family relationships can have devastating long-term effects. Second, it demonstrates how someone can truly disappear in modern society. Despite being a well-groomed woman who shopped at upscale stores and presumably had some interactions with society, Joyce was able to live for more than a decade without anyone who knew her past having any idea where she was. In an era before social media, but after widespread mobility, it was possible to simply vanish. Third, it shows the lasting impact that mental health treatment can have, for better or worse. The psychiatric treatment Joyce received in the 1950s appears to have played a significant role in her estrangement from her family. Whether that treatment was appropriate or harmful, it shaped the course of her entire life. Fourth, it illustrates the importance of preserving evidence and never giving up on cases. The Fairfax County Police Department kept Joyce's case active for 25 years, preserving evidence and periodically reviewing the case. That dedication meant that when new technology became available, they were ready to use it. Fifth, it demonstrates the power of modern DNA technology, combined with public participation. The same case that seemed completely unsolvable through traditional methods was resolved relatively quickly once forensic genetic genealogy was applied, and the public funding that made the testing possible shows how citizen involvement can drive justice. Finally, it raises important questions about autonomy, privacy, and the rights of the deceased. Joyce wanted to be anonymous. She took extraordinary steps to ensure she wouldn't be identified. Yet, her identification brought closure to family members who had been searching for her. Was it right to override her wishes? There are good arguments on both sides, and each person must decide for themselves. The legacy of the Christmas tree. Lady Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers will always be remembered as the Christmas tree lady, even though we now know her real name. That small decorated tree has become an enduring symbol, representing both the mystery that captivated investigators and true crime enthusiasts for 25 years and the broader themes of loneliness, estrangement, and the human need for connection. Her case has had several lasting impacts. It has raised awareness about the number of unidentified persons in the United States and the possibility of identifying them through advanced DNA technology. It has demonstrated the effectiveness of crowdfunding for forensic testing. It has sparked conversations about family estrangement and mental health treatment. And it has reminded people that behind every Jane Doe and John Doe is a real person with a full life story, even if that story has been lost. For the Fairfax County Police Department, the case represents a success story in their cold casework and a testament to the dedication of multiple generations of detectives who never gave up. For Othram and the genetic genealogy community, it's another example of how their technology can bring answers to families and close cases that seemed unsolvable. For Joyce's surviving siblings, it brings closure mixed with sadness. They finally know what happened to their sister, but that knowledge comes with the pain of learning she died alone, that all those years they were searching for her, she was already gone. It also comes with the knowledge that Joyce chose anonymity, that even in death, she didn't want them to find her. For the anonymous donors who funded the DNA testing, their contribution made a real difference in the world. They helped give Joyce her name back and gave her family answers. They demonstrated how individual acts of generosity, when combined, can achieve significant results. Conclusion. The case of the Christmas tree lady represents many things: a mystery solved through modern science, a tragedy of family estrangement, a story of loneliness and isolation, and a testament to the dedication of law enforcement and the generosity of strangers. Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers was born in 1927 on a farm in Iowa. She was creative, intelligent, and artistic. She worked at 17 Magazine in Los Angeles and taught second grade in a Catholic school. She married and divorced. She wrote a book about her childhood. She estranged herself from her family. She moved across the country multiple times. And on December 18, 1996, she laid down in a cemetery in Annandale, Virginia, next to a small Christmas tree, and ended her life. For 25 years, she was simply the Christmas Tree Lady, a mystery that captivated countless people who wondered who she was and why she chose to die anonymously. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, dedicated investigators, and the contributions of anonymous donors, we now know her name. But knowing her name doesn't mean we understand everything about her story. Joyce remains in many ways as mysterious as ever. We know the facts of her life, but not the full truth of her experience. We know what she did, but not always why. We know she suffered, but not exactly how much or in what ways. What we can say with certainty is that Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers was a human being who deserved to be remembered as more than just Jane Doe. She had a family who cared about her, even across decades of silence. She had talents and intelligence and creativity. She also had pain deep enough that she chose to end her life, and to do so in a way that would prevent anyone from knowing who she was. The small Christmas tree she brought with her to the cemetery that December morning has become a symbol of her story, representing lost connections, lost innocence, and perhaps lost hope. But it also represents something else, the human desire to mark our passing, to leave some small sign that we were here, even if we choose not to leave our name. Joyce's story is ultimately about the complexity of human life, about how the choices we make and the pain we carry can shape our entire existence. It's about how family relationships can both sustain us and damage us. It's about how we can be surrounded by people yet utterly alone. And it's about how, even when someone tries to disappear completely, there are those who will work to bring them back into the light. Now, when visitors come to Pleasant Valley Memorial Park in Annandale, they know that somewhere in that cemetery on December 18, 1996, a woman named Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers lay down to rest. She brought with her a small Christmas tree decorated with gold ornaments and red ribbon. She had made a journey from a farm in Iowa to Los Angeles to Seattle to Tucson to Virginia. And at the end of that journey, she chose this place, this time, and this way to say goodbye to a world she found too painful to continue living in. The mystery of her identity has been solved, but the deeper mysteries of her heart, her thoughts, and her final moments remain locked away forever. In the end, perhaps that's as it should be. Some things are meant to stay private, even when our names are restored to us. But her story serves as a reminder to all of us about the importance of connection, the lasting impact of family relationships, the need for compassion in mental health treatment, and the reality that there are lonely people all around us, some of whom may be planning to disappear without anyone noticing. Joyce Marilyn Meyer Sommers is no longer just the Christmas Tree Lady. She has her name back. Her family has their answers. And somewhere, perhaps, her spirit has found the peace that eluded her in life. If you're interested in learning more about unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and the incredible work being done to solve them through forensic genetic genealogy, please subscribe to Lore to Mystery. We bring you in-depth investigations into the most compelling mysteries and the science that helps solve them. Don't forget to like this video and share it with anyone who might be interested in Joyce's story. Together, we can keep these stories alive and support the work being done to give names back to the nameless and answers to those who seek them. Thank you for watching, and remember, behind every mystery is a human being whose story deserves to be told.